Hello and welcome to another Warhammer 40k 8th edition reveal video. Now before we get straight into this, I'd just like to let you guys know that I'm trying out a new microphone. I've fiddled around my settings and I'm trying a new microphone. I'm still trying to perfect these recordings as best as I can, bring the sort of best quality that I can to you guys. So just let me know what you guys think, if it's better or worse. Because the last microphone I had was too quiet, and then the one after that was too sensitive. Picked up a lot of background noise and other bits. So now I'm trying another one just to see if I can get the right settings. And if I can't, then we'll just have to live with it, or keep trying, one way or the other. Anyway, without getting into too much of a long-winded intro, let's get straight on to what this video is going to be about. Well, if you've read the title of the video, you should know today we're going to be looking at the new morale system for Warhammer 8th edition and what does it mean for the Imperial Guard. That's the key here. We're not just talking about this from a general point of view, we're talking about this from an Imperial Guard commander's point of view. So, let's take a look at what the article itself says. It says blah blah blah, bit of narrative, battles can be won or lost, brave actions of a few people, or panicked by loads of people running away. Now they address something really important in the second paragraph, which is morale has always been a part of Warhammer 40k. In the past edition, though, it did often seem that in lots of games that it could be largely ignored. So many units were immune to its various effects, and where it did apply, though, you had to take lots of tests, blah blah blah. But basically, the key thing they say is a lot of units were just able to ignore it. So they want morale to be much more important and much more potent. That's what they say straight off the bat. And I kind of agree with them in many ways that it could be ignored. Okay, I don't disagree with them there. I mean, let's just take Imperial Guard as an example. I mean, we had priests, which we could take 0 to 3 priests, and that's just from Imperial Guard point of view. We're not even talking about allying in priests from different detachments, like the Codex Imperial Agents. You could take more priests from there. I'm not even talking about those guys. We're just talking about the Guard Codex. You could take 3 priests, which essentially meant you could take 3 units where there was no you were fearless. Essentially, Zealot gave you fearless, and then you had commissars. You could take 1 for each command squad, which meant if you had 2 command squads plus platoon command squads, you could take another commissar. They essentially made you ignore it as well, because if you failed a test, you could just blam a guy with a commissar. So I kind of understand, Imperial Guard, we had a lot of, we did have, as a microcosm, we were a perfect example of how, if you wanted to, you could have an army-wide fearless army. And if you, blobbed up, you didn't even have to buy that many of them. You could just have 3 or 4 commissars, bish, bash, bosh. You have pretty much whole army was ignoring morale. So I kind of agree with them, but I'm just, warning you now, I'm not a huge fan of where they've gone in general, okay, because I have read over the article. Okay, so the new morale phase is simple. This is what the next paragraph says. The new morale phase is simple and only happens once per player turn at the end of all phases. Okay, so that's the first key point here. It's no longer a case of at the end of the shooting phase, take a morale check if you've taken 25% casualties. That's gone. It's no longer if you lose combat, you take a morale check, and that's gone as well. It's just there's essentially a morale phase is now a 5th phase or 4th phase in Warhammer 40k. So psychic phase is still its own thing, isn't it? So you've got the movement phase, you've got the psychic phase, you've got the shooting phase, you've got the assault phase, and now you've got the morale phase. And it has become its own phase. It just happens at the end of each turn. There you go. So interestingly, they have added in another step to the game. It carries on. It will apply to almost every unit and represents warriors fleeing the battlefield, dying from the psychic feedback shockwaves of their allies, or retreating with injured or fallen brethren. There will be very few units indeed that will not feel its effects. Okay, I'm hoping vehicles don't feel its effects, and I believe they do clarify that. Mechanic, this is where, alright, this is it, guys. This is the crunch. This is what, they've been giving us a bit of narrative. They've given us a bit of you know, this is what it used to be like, this is what it's going to be like now. And this is actually what happens now. The mechanics are simple. Any units that suffered casualties in a turn must take a morale test at the end of it. You just roll a d6, add the number of models from the unit that have been slain, and if the number is bigger than the unit's leadership, the unit loses the difference in additional models. So, let's use Imperial Guard as an example. Let's say you have a 20-man blob. If you lose 10 guys to shooting, then you have to take, at the end of the turn, let's say you lose half, let's say you lose 10 guys. Okay, you've lost 10. Then at the end of the turn, you take your battle shock phase or morale phase. You roll a d6. You add that to the 10 that you've lost. So let's say you get an average of 3. You add 13. That would equal 13. And if we go off guard leadership, which is predicted, unfortunately, in this edition to be leadership 6, because Space Marines leadership 7. So guard will probably be leadership 6. You minus 6 from 13 equals 7. You lose 7 more guys. That's it. There's no break test, it's just you take additional casualties. If those of you who are familiar with the concept, imagine if you are playing Warhammer Fantasy, you know, not Sigmar, but Warhammer Fantasy, and you are undead. Essentially, every army in the 41st millennium now is undead, and they crumble. I mean, it is a huge kick in the nuts for guard infantry. From what I can see now, it is a huge kick when we're down. You know, I've been having a bit. If you guys are watching the videos, you know I've been seesawing back and forth between this is good, this is bad. I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure about that. It's brutal. I mean, I'm from just a pure infantry standpoint, for you know, take from blob infantry, it's crucifying. It's a death blow. It's that bad. Unless we have some way of mitigating this test, which they have. But the thing is that they have said there will be very few units indeed that will not feel its effects. So I am, you know, that doesn't fill me with confidence. I don't know what to tell you guys. It's sad times, very sad times. I mean, let me give you. We've got to remember. We've really got to remember is it's at the end of the phase, which means this test takes into account shooting and combat casualties. If you have a 40-man blob of conscripts, standard procedure, standard 40-man blob of conscripts. You know, let's say, you know, they're just, you know, they don't run away, so they just crumble, don't they? So you have your 40-man blob of conscripts. If you take sort of 10 or so casualties in combat, from shooting, sorry, and then someone slams into you and does loads of damage to you in close combat as well. Let's say they do another 10, 15 casualties. Let's say 10 casualties. Let's say your blob is cut down by 20 men. You lose half your unit. Conscript leadership is going to be like, what, 4 or 5? Which means you are let's say it's leadership. Let's say there's still leadership 5 somehow. That means you take your 20 and you minus your leadership, so that's 15. So you're guaranteed to lose 15 more guys. You then roll the dice, and if you get a 5 or a 6, you lose the whole unit. If you get a 1, you're left with like what, 4 guys, 2, 3 guys. 3, 2 guys, 4, 1 guy, and then you get a 5 or a 6, and the whole unit's gone. Absolutely bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. It's just, I can't. Now, people, I've been reading around online before I made this video, and there's loads of people saying, oh, in Age of Sigmar, there's ways around it. Because this phase has been stolen from Age of Sigmar, or borrowed. Age of Sigmar was the inspiration for this. And people say, oh, there's loads of ways of getting around it in Age of Sigmar. Loads of ways, you know, and people keep saying, oh, Commissars will probably allow you a reroll. It's like, I don't want a reroll. I don't want it to exist. I mean, I've been keeping a really open mind with this whole 8th edition thing. And you guys can tell I've been trying to be as balanced as possible. I've just been saying where it's good for the guard and where it's bad for the guard. This is not necessarily bad for the guard, but it is bad potentially for infantry guard, because it just means, well, not even infantry guard, blob guard. It just means that blobs are dead, man. That's the thing. Now, I've had a little bit of a rant, I've had a little bit of a moan, and I've looked at the negatives. Let's look at some positives. Let's do a little bit of wish listing. Let's look at, not saying let's doom and gloom. Let's not say it's the end of the world. Let's not say fuck 8th edition. Let's not say any of that shit. Let's do the correct thing. Let's see what this actually means to the guard. Let's see, just based on a little bit of information, how our tactics will be changing. Okay? So number one, a little bit of hope. A little bit of wish listing. The article goes on to say that there are units that will affect this battle shock one way or another. So Hemlock fighters will reduce the leadership of enemy models by 1 if they're within 12 inches, and Dark Apostles, people can use his leadership if they're within a certain distance. So they have already mentioned that there are going to be characters and units that will help you with this battle shock. Now, my sincere hope, I will praise the Emperor so fucking hard if my sincere hope comes true, which is that Commissars will still have the summary execution rule, and it will be very simply, you blam a guy, and then that's it. You pass the battle shock. You ignore the battle shock. You execute a guy to ignore battle shock. Please, please, please make that the case. I don't care if you have the rule where, that we currently have, where on a 1 or a 2, your opponent chooses who you blam. On a 3, 4, 5, or 6, you choose. I don't care. Keep that in. But it would be essential for pure infantry guard, pure blob guard, to have that rule. Because it does kind of make sense, because it does kind of balance in some ways. Because imagine, let's say you took a smattering of casualties from shooting. Let's say you took 3. Let's say you take 4 casualties from shooting. Okay. On a blob of guys, 20-man blob, 30-man blob. Now, you've taken 4 casualties, and if you assume your leadership is leadership 6, then it means on a 1 or a 2, you'll be fine. But on a 4, 5, or 6, you're going to start taking casualties. It would therefore be a fair trade to be like, right, I'm going to guarantee to kill someone, blam. So I'm going to lose an additional casualty from battle shock, but then I'm not going to lose an additional potentially 4 casualties from the battle shock. Does that make sense? So I really, really hope that's what Commissars do, because that would be essential. Yeah, and obviously sometimes it'll be balanced like that, and other times, you might take like 20 casualties in a blob, and then you just don't want to lose the rest of your horde. So you just go blam, and you keep the rest of the blob in line. That makes sense, and it works for Commissars, and it is pretty much the direct translation from the rule that we currently have, which is you blam a guy, you pass the leadership test. So it translates across well. Doesn't mean that guard players have to, change up their strategies too much. We can just guarantee that extra casualty every turn to ignore battle shock. Good, I'll take it. Now, I don't know if we still have priests. Not sure if they'll still be giving us things like Fearless. I imagine Fearless, guys, is just gone. Just anything that previously gave you fearless is gone. Okay, so I'm just going to say that's what I think. Now, basically, that's my wish listing. Now, the second thing is, how can we adapt our tactics for this? Well, firstly, we look at another part of this article which says, conversely, single model units, like many vehicles, but interestingly it says not all vehicles, but many vehicles, won't have to take the test as they are units of one and they have no other models in their squad to lose. Okay, interestingly, so independent characters and tanks and vehicles will not take the test. So I made a video previously about what happens if a tank loses the morale test. Does it get overrun? Now, tanks of leadership? No, that doesn't happen. So, okay, fine, I accept that. But vehicles, if they don't take the test, it means that we could start seeing the return of armoured guard lists. Or, what I think more likely is mechanised guard lists. I think that the guard infantry is still going to be really, really important. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an infantry commander or that I've been encouraging you guys to go out and get infantry. No, I still think that guard infantry are going to be really, really important. Because we're still going to need that bubble wrap, number one. We're still going to need, if there's any sort of objective secured kind of missions, we're still going to need the infantry. So, I still think guard infantry is going to be important. I just think rather than rocking around in big blobs of guys, we're going to be rocking around, you know, like something crazy like 10 chimeras with 10 squads in each. I could easily see that becoming the norm. What you got to remember is you're still going to need that bubble wrap. Really important thing is you're still going to need some bubble wrap. I mean, at the end of the day, what if you know you're facing a drop pod army? You're still going to need to protect your tanks. You still can't afford, just because it's like, oh well, what you got to remember is just because you have the situation where it's like, oh well, no point in taking infantry. I'll lose half the squad and the other half will run away. No, you might just have to factor that in as a part of your strategy now. You might have to, you know, you're still going to need bubble wrap because the last thing you want is to take a full army of tanks or, you know, a full army of mechanized and tanks and for you to lose most of it in one go because you have no bubble wrap. So we're still going to need the infantry for a number of reasons. How will our strategies change though? So we've that's how our lists will probably change. We'll probably start seeing a lot more vehicles in guard lists, or in my list I should say. Probably, but I still think I'm going to have a healthy amount of infantry, especially if my Commissar wish comes true. Now, if the Commissar wish doesn't come true, and I still want to use really infantry heavy armies, how am I thinking I'm going to be doing it? Well, simply enough, I think it's going to be the time of MSU Guard. I think it's going to be the time of many, many, many 10-man units. The reason I'm saying this is because let's actually think about this for 1 second. Guard units no longer run away. You might lose like 3 or 4 guys and then lose 1 or 2 more, but the squad still stays where it is. It still, in a funny sort of way, maintains the ground that it's taken, which is good. And couple this with the rumour that I've seen, which is controlling players now choose which casualties get removed. That means that guard infantry will probably be able to make, you know, what ground they do take is the ground that they will keep unless they are wiped out. So that's important, number one. So you're going to have multiple small units to avoid the horrendous effects of battle shock, because what happens if you've got a unit which, if you lose like 10 men, let's say you've got a 20, 30 man squad, if you lose 10 men from that, those 10 casualties start fucking up the remaining 10 or 20 guys you've got. If you just have a single 10-man guard squad and you lose 10 men, that's it. You just lose 10 men. So I can really see how I'm seeing this in my head is I am going to have waves of guardsmen in 10-man squads. There's no blasts anymore, stood shoulder to shoulder. Maybe I've heard there's some crazy shit going on in the assault phase that I'm going to have a look into. But, you know, where you can start dragging more other units in. But if we have squads, if we have squads evenly spaced apart but close enough to support each other, plus you know, we have sort of, let's say we have sort of 5 or 6 of those spread out in my first wave, and then behind that, I've got another wave of guardsmen, and behind that, another wave of guardsmen, and it's just a case of I'm going to have multiple firing lines, multiple waves marching across the field, and every inch of ground that I take is an inch that I keep. You have to physically blow away every single squad because they're not going to run. They're not going to flee. You know, maybe if I lose 5 men in a squad, I'm going to lose another 4. But hell, I've still got that one guy, and that might not seem like a lot, but we've all played games when we've just had 1 or 2 or 3 guardsmen just on an objective, and that's all we've needed to win the game. It happens. So that's how I think pure infantry or infantry heavy guard tactics are going to change. I think it's going to go from blob guard to multiple small unit guard. But I still think that we're going to have our infantry heavy army. We're still going to need to protect those tanks. Okay? We're still going to need them. So that's it. Just to recap, morale is now in crumble form. So if for the more casualties you take, the more guys that you lose at the end of the term. So if you take big blobs of guys, expect to take huge crumble tests essentially. But I think pure infantry is still going to be pretty strong. Multiple small unit is definitely going to be the way to go. But there is hope. We could get units like commissars, which if you put a commissar in a unit, he blams the guy and you ignore the test. If that's the case, then I think blob guard could be really overpowered. And that would be awesome because that's what we want. We want blob infantry to have its time in the sun again. So thank you guys. Obviously, of course, I want to know what this is being a huge, big, important topic. I want to know what you guys think of the situation with the morale. And, you know, obviously leave those in the comments and I'll try and reply to them. But, you know, I'm really, really interested to see what you guys think. I imagine there's going to be a lot of players out there dusting off the Lehman Russes, dusting off the Chimeras, and prepping them for 8th edition. I definitely think could be the case. So, thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.